Thank you, Nigel. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. More than 50 Conservative MPs have signed a letter urging the Prime Minister to introduce emergency legislation to ease the migrant crisis. They want modern slavery laws changed so that people are returned to safe countries faster. They also say those who claim they've been trafficked should be sent back without objection. Signatories, including Sir Graham Brady and Esther McVeigh, believe it would deter people from crossing the Channel. GB News understands almost 450 people have been intercepted on 9 small boats so far today. The government's considering asking the armed forces to stand in for hospital staff during possible strikes this winter. Health officials are drawing up contingencies to cover frontline workers as ambulance and drivers and paramedics consider joining nurses in their upcoming walkouts. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says they're concerned about the impact the action could have on patients. The Foreign Secretary is backing the right to peaceful protests in China over COVID restrictions. Protesters turned out again this evening, despite a strong police presence. It follows demonstrations over the weekend, which started after 10 people were killed in a fire at an apartment block. Protesters blame quarantine measures, saying they prevented the victims from escaping. National Grid has decided not to introduce its energy savings scheme tomorrow, paying households if they cut power usage. The move would have been the first ever live run of the operator's demand flexibility service, designed to ease pressure on the country's energy grid and avoid blackouts. The government's launching a £1 billion scheme to make middle-income homes more energy efficient. The 3-year scheme will see hundreds of thousands of homes receive loft and cavity wall insulation from the spring. Households that don't currently get support to upgrade their homes will be prioritised, whilst a fifth of the funding will be set aside for the most vulnerable. And Ukrainian families joined the Prime Minister in switching on the Christmas lights at Downing Street this evening. A warning: the following contains flashing images.
2, 1...
Mr Sunak welcomed Ukrainians to the annual tradition, including those from conflict zones in the east and the south of Ukraine. Well, earlier today, the First Lady of Ukraine hung ornaments on the tree with the Prime Minister's wife. Elena Zelenska is expected to address MPs and peers tomorrow as part of her visit. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Farage.
Good evening. Robust pragmatism. Yes, that's the new phrase we heard overnight, and it's being applied to foreign policy with China and with Russia. I sense, though, perhaps this is the new creed of the Sunak government, robust pragmatism. But quite what that will do to sort out the English Channel crisis, I simply don't know. After 2 weeks of very bad weather, today the seas were calmer, and they'll stay that way until at least Thursday of this week. Over 400 people crossed today. Here's an update on those crossings, but also on the growing worry over diphtheria from GB News' Home Affairs editor, Mark White.
Just after first light, the border force vessel Typhoon could be seen approaching Dover Harbour, with the first of hundreds of migrants picked up in the Channel this morning. Around 50 people were taken on board Typhoon for the journey to the Dover processing centre. For more than a fortnight, bad weather has largely scuppered attempts by the criminal gangs to push boats off the beaches of northwestern France. In fact, since the 13th of November, just one small boat with 36 people on board has made it across the English Channel. But conditions are now flat calm, meaning some of the thousands who've been waiting in various makeshift camps around Dunkirk and Calais are being funnelled down to the beaches and onto the boats. Increasingly frustrated at the government's seeming inability to get a grip on the crisis, around 50 Conservative MPs have written to the Prime Minister, demanding he introduce emergency legislation to deal in particular with the number of Albanians arriving in small boats. They want all Albanians rapidly removed back to their own country, and any who claim to have been trafficked also returned home.
One of the problems is the longer you take, the more appeals you get. There's a harsh truth that if they're here for a couple of weeks, they'll find a British lawyer and away they go. If they're here for a couple of years, they'll meet somebody, get married, have children, and then the story's over. They can stay because they have family rights. So the quicker you do it, the better.
Are you concerned about the spread of other diseases, Home Secretary?
It is yet more pressure on the Home Secretary, already dealing with the consequences of dozens of migrants who were infected with diphtheria being farmed out to various hotels around the UK, even though they were highly infectious.
The Home Secretary and I were updated on the situation over the weekend by Dame Jenny Harries of the UK HSA, who confirmed to us that 50 cases of diphtheria have been reported in asylum accommodation. It's important to emphasise that the UK HSA has been clear that the risk to the wider UK population from onward transmission of diphtheria is very low, thanks in no small part to our excellent childhood immunisation programme.
It is a growing health crisis within a migrant crisis that shows no sign of slowing. With good weather conditions throughout most of this week, authorities are braced for the possibility that thousands more could cross the channel in the days ahead. Mark White, GB News.
So you might ask yourself, given they knew there were cases of diphtheria in Manston, why have people been farmed out all around the country, with 50 that we know of have been put in hotels all over our nation? Well, the reason is a series of legal challenges. You see, Manston is not supposed to hold people for more than 24 hours. So there are about 4 judicial reviews lining up. Believe it or believe it not, those that are pushing these reviews actually want those who were held in Manston for long periods of time to receive, wait for it, I hope you're sitting down, up to £5,000 in compensation. I think for many of these leftist groups, even if we put them up in the Ritz, it frankly wouldn't be good enough. But think about the health implications. You see, a letter was revealed today by my former MEP colleague Stephen Wolfe, dated August the 27th, 2021. This was in regard to people settling here from Afghanistan. It said those that come from Afghanistan should be put and cared for in managed quarantine services. And the reason for this was all too clear, that in Afghanistan, hepatitis B is 10 times more prevalent than it is in the UK. Hepatitis B, folks, is very, very infectious. The letter goes on to say that tuberculosis is very common in Afghanistan, including forms of TB that are drug resistant. Oh, and there's a risk from typhoid too. So we've known about this for over a year, and yet pushy lawyers have had those people taken out of Manston. You see, the point is, folks, all the while we're signed up to the ECHR, all the while we have an outdated UN definition on what a refugee is, these problems, in my view, will go on. You tell me, will robust pragmatism solve this problem? Farage at gbnews.uk. Well, I'm joined by Conservative Member of Parliament Sir Jake Berry, until recently, very recently, chairman of the party, MP for Rossendale and Darwin. Jake, David Davis has got 50 MPs to sign a letter to say, if you've come from the safe country, a country that is a NATO member and a EU applicant, that actually the modern slavery law should be amended and people could be sent straight back. Is David Davis and his 50 colleagues, are they on the right track with this?
Yeah, I think they are. I mean, we should be really proud in this country of the Modern Day Slavery Act. It's something that Parliament did. We were a global leader in this field. But where we get things wrong or laws are open to abuse, we should never shy away from changing them. David is right. He's picked up on this point that I think you've picked up previously, that people who come here and claim to be victims of modern slavery often don't say that. So they've had 2 or 3 hours sat with one of these highly paid lawyers that the taxpayers is paying for them to see the system is being abused, and I think the government should look at changing it.
Yeah, quickly, I suggest, because the country is getting pretty upset.
Yeah, but we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because this is a good piece of legislation that is being abused by people who want to use it to remain in the UK. We should change it rather than scrap it.
Jake, energy. Our problems with energy. Wind energy. It was during Cameron's time that considerable political pressure against onshore wind farms was applied. I was part of that in 2013 and 20... Well, of course. I mean, of course, obviously.
You're to blame for everything, aren't you?
Well, you know, they're ugly. They don't really work very well. They involve massive subsidies. But you're very much in favour.
I mean, Boris used to call them the white satanic mills, which I think, you know, in the north of England is something we can understand. Look, no country is sovereign without having its own sovereign energy supply. And at the moment, we are, you know, being held to ransom by a hostile foreign power, which is the reason when your bill drops through your letterbox or arrives in your inbox, you get that bill shock of that huge bill. So the government has to have a plan to become self-sufficient for energy. And I think that wind turbines, and by the way, fracking as well, which I proudly voted for with Liz Truss, are part of that mix. The wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine.
This is the problem.
But they should be part of the mix. And we have a de facto ban. So what I'm calling, Simon Clarke's calling for, and I've been supporting him, is let's reverse that de facto ban with a referendum lock for local communities, a legally binding referendum that gives them a stake. Maybe they get paid for having them nearby, that gives them a stake, so they can be part of our energy mix.
Actually, they're paying already. Here's the point. You know, I've got the updated...
Well, everyone's paying, but not everyone's looking at them.
No, true, but I'm just having a look at this. I mean, this is the OBR updated figures from the autumn statement from Jeremy Hunt. And since 2012... our renewable subsidies have been £78 billion. And between now and 28, there'll be a further £56 billion. Now, I could live with wind energy, but not with the poor having these subsidies added onto their bills. It's wrong.
It may be an opportunity to revisit that as well, but I don't think we should be turning our back on any form of energy when what our country desperately needs, and I know you agree with this because we've discussed it before, is to be self-sufficient. So we should be pursuing nuclear, gas, including non-conventional gas, fracking as everyone calls it, wind turbines, solar farms, whatever we need to do, whatever it takes. We cannot let our country be held to ransom by hostile powers.
Jay, you and I agree on that. All I'm saying to you is that onshore and offshore wind is very expensive. It is the poorer people, pro rata, that are paying for this because energy is a much bigger percentage of their overall outgoings. And that for the next 3 days this week, there'll be no wind.
Yeah, but as we think we're about to come on to, but poorer people are also paying for new nuclear. I mean, it's just part of our energy mix. The great mistake I think we've made is to move away from more traditional powers of energy generation, like nuclear, like gas, historically coal-fired power stations, and have this sort of reliance only on renewables. We need it all.
I know we do, and I noticed yesterday that our coal imports are doubling this year. We're stocking up with coal just in case we get problems in the winter and there's a pit up in the...
Well, we've got billions of pounds of it. And that's why I'm also in favour of reopening the metallurgical coal mine, which is in Cumbria, that the government's also thinking about at the moment. Why would we import coal from elsewhere in the world, which is often extracted to a much lower standard than we would do it here in the UK? They don't have the sort of carbon scrubbing that we would have to take carbon dioxide out of from the power stations. Why would we do that when we have billions of pounds worth of free energy, not free, but billions of pounds worth of energy under our feet here in the United Kingdom?
When it comes to energy, when it comes to the cross-channel, well, it's becoming an emergency, I think, frankly, in political terms. When it comes to housing, where there's been, quite a big rebellion, these aren't just normal debates that are going on within the Conservative Party. These are real, genuine splits. The Rishi honeymoon is over, isn't it?
Look, I think they are the normal debates. I think this is actually a return to politics as normal. Conservatives should be arguing about policy, maybe not quite as publicly.
2022, we haven't seen much of that.
No, but I'm hopeful, Nigel. But we should be arguing about policy. So, look, on the housing, my view is we need to build more houses. I don't think that should be directed by Whitehall centrally set targets, because I'm a localist. I actually believe in devolution, devolving as much power as possible. If you want a wind turbine, you should have a local vote on it. If you want fracking, you should have a local vote on it. What if everyone says no?
What if everyone says no?
Well, that's democracy. Not everyone agrees with referendum results, as you know.
Oh, I'm very, very familiar with that.
But it's democracy, isn't it? And in truth, on the housing, I look out my front door in Helmshire in Lancashire, I've got 3 kids. Every house has got another family in it. So where are my kids going to live? I think people understand that we have to build more houses. I think on the energy, people understand we need to become self-sufficient. And I think, on other issues, there's an active debate.
Is the next election lost already?
No, I don't think it is. I can see a path through to victory, but what the Conservatives have to do is regain a reputation for competence and delivery. And the biggest issue that I pick up on my doorsteps in the Red Wall as my constituency is immigration. Yeah. We've got to grip that issue. If we grip that issue, we've got a good chance.
If, a heck of a word. Sir Jake Berry, thank you very much indeed. Well, I don't agree with him at all on wind energy, but the basic idea that we need whatever we can get, I do go along with that very, very strongly. In a moment, we're going to dig deeper into energy policy, and in particular, what's happening to people with smart meters. Some of them are beginning to have a very tough time.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narendra.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Robust pragmatism. I can just imagine the sort of 24-year-old Oxbridge graduate with the first would have designed that term. And they're always, oh, isn't he marvellous? Yes, the public will really buy into that. Of course, the truth is no one even understands what it means, least of all me. I asked you whether this new approach would solve the cross-channel emergency. And Rick says, don't be silly. We've already solved it by giving France more money. Very good, Rick. Jay says, no, because even this ambiguous term, which no doubt some spin doctor, yes, absolutely came up with, is indicative of deceptive, careless attitude. if he was going to sort it, he'd say something blunt like, I'm going to sort it. Not much chance of that. Another says, what's your solution, Nigel? Because taking back control after Brexit didn't work. No, it hasn't worked, actually, on legal or illegal immigration. Well, mercifully, we were spared being fully part of a common EU energy policy, as countries like Germany have made an even bigger mess. I know it's difficult to believe, but they have. Bigger mess of things than we have. But that's not to say we haven't got our very deep problems. We do. Today was supposed to be quite a big day with a big national grid announcement. I don't think it's really quite happened. Well, friend of this programme and somebody who for months has been warning us about just how grave the situation might get this winter is energy analyst Clive Moffat, and he joins me this evening in the studio.
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening. So we were supposed to hear some big announcement from National Grid today about perhaps incentivising us not using energy. Not happened.
I was slightly perturbed by that. I thought the announcement was made out to be much bigger and more important than it was, to be frank. I think it might have frightened a few people out there who are thinking we're going to have blackouts. And I think you've got to bear in mind that what the grid have been doing is merely doing some tests for the customers of Octopus to see if they would be responsive to turning off if they were paid to do so.
Yeah.
And all it is a way of mitigating the risk of a blackout by trying to sort of phase out a bit of demand at peak time. And nobody quite knows how many people would participate, what the scale of it would be, what impact it would be on total demand at peak time. So I would have played it down. If I'd have been Grid, I'd have actually sort of had a few real goes at it before making any announcements.
Yeah, it's been an odd day. Now, one issue, Clive, that I've been talking about with people are smart meters.
Yep.
You know, because I have had people knock on the door, I've had endless letters that I must get a smart meter, an electricity smart meter, and I have been suspicious, sceptical of these meters. Right. And what I've been learning over the course of the last few days, it's not to my surprise at all, is that, of course, actually, if you haven't paid your electricity bill or if you're behind, they put you on a tariff where you have to basically start to pay in advance.
Prepayment, yeah.
Prepayment. And if you don't do it, at the click of a button, your energy goes. And it started to happen to people. Presumably, if you have a smart meter and there is a shortage of energy, they could also cut your energy off to manage demand, couldn't they?
Yeah, the two things we've just been discussing are related, because I think one of the real motivations behind the suppliers been pushing Grid to organise some kind of mini auction amongst consumers about wanting to be turned off is to get them onto smart meters, because you can't participate in this unless you're on a half-hourly meter. So once they get them on the meters, then they are subject, if they're in arrears, to being cut off, as you said, and without notice. And this is, I think this is terrible, because here we are looking at the aggregate. We're spending billions of our money subsidising the energy suppliers so that they can hedge the cost between wholesale price of gas and what they and the benchmark. Yep. And in return, what do we get? What are the consumers getting back from that? At the very least, you'd expect them, the suppliers, to be bending over backwards to compete with each other, to offer easy payment schemes or some kind of deferred payment schemes, not forcing people onto meters so they can press a button.
Now, you know, I said this to you folks a few months ago. I promised you it wasn't a wild conspiracy theory. It is coming true. They get pretty heavy when they're trying to get you to take a smart meter, but legally they can't force you, can they?
No.
Right, remember that? Legally, they can't force you. My advice is don't get a smart meter unless you already have one.
And the other issue is that if you have volunteered with your supplier, like Octopus, to say, I would be prepared to cut my appliances down at peak time under the scheme we were discussing, if you don't do that, there's nothing they can do apart from see from the phone meter that you haven't done it.
Right. Yeah. No. I get that. Meters, not a great idea.
There's no clarity in this. And what we have discussed, you and I, months ago, was the need for a public information campaign. without penalties to actually get people to encourage them to show how they could reduce their energy bills. And we finally, was it last week? We got a commitment to £25 million public information programme.
Yeah. Now, split within the governing party over onshore wind. Thoughts on onshore wind, Clive?
Well, let's put it this way, if you're a mad fan of green energy and wind farms, you'd be looking to try and get a significant scale out of the exercise. And offshore provides you with bigger turbines, bigger scale, and effectively greater lower cost per unit of energy created. They do cost more, a lot more, and their lifetime is a little bit questionable in terms of where they are.
We don't know, do we?
What maintenance costs, we don't know.
Yeah.
So it's an unknown factor. On onshore, you'd say, well, the problem with it is that I think the last few days, when the wind hasn't been blowing, is testament, again, is the fact that Rishi, Prime Minister, was wrong to say at COP27 that renewables is the answer to energy security. Because the true cost of wind, and I do get tired of people saying it's the cheapest form of energy known to man, is that they don't take account of the transportation costs of getting remote energy to centres of demand, the transportation costs that we all pay, factored into our bills, and the costs of having to pay for gas and in some cases coal to come on board short term to meet the deficiency when they're not working.
Yeah, so as you say, what looks like the cost, there's actually an awful lot we have to add on.
And the other thing is that the latest announcement, which we must add in, is the latest announcement from Chaps, is that he wants to set up a GB nuclear bank, a nuclear fund. That with 30 small-scale reactors and 3 or 4 biggies. And that would cost an arm and a leg. And the point is it would lock consumers into a very, very high energy cost and also a capital cost, which we're currently, at Hinkley, we're not having to pay, thank goodness. So I think that all of these things need to be thrown into sort of an analysis, which we haven't had. Treasury have never actually delivered a full cost-benefit analysis of net zero. Long overdue.
Well, very interesting. There's some polling over the weekend suggesting that the public are getting more sceptical about net zero. Clive, as ever, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
And being so informative. Now, you can't fail to have noticed, whether you watched it or not, I certainly didn't, that Matt Hancock made the final of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here and got a bronze medal. We're told he's now going to have a career in showbiz. No, really, that is what we're told. And he pocketed 400 grand for going into the jungle as a serving member of Parliament. Don't know about you, but my feeling is that this man, more than any other. And I remember him saying, you know, this is not advice, this is an order, a bit like the chap who'd just been made the sort of head prefect at school and feeling terribly, terribly pleased with himself. But actually, he ruined lots of people's lives. We now know most of that lockdown was highly unnecessary. We should have looked after the elderly and the vulnerable and allowed everybody else to get on with their lives. Young people not able to have proper university lives, not able to have the normal growing up parts of life, and older people too, in many cases, finding themselves cut off and isolated from their family, from their friends, from their loved ones. You know, Hancock was responsible for much of this, but now when he's questioned, he says all he did was take advice. Well, it's just not good enough. And I think a big chunk of that 400,000 should go to people, families, who become victims of that lockdown. And as the years go on, we'll learn many more people will die through missed NHS diagnoses than were ever going to die of that virus. In a moment, I'll be joined by John Bolton. It's a Talking Pint special. So much to talk about on the world stage, and not least, of course, what is happening in the USA. Do you know we still haven't got an official result for the Arizona election? It's unbelievable. Back with you in a couple of minutes.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you know, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
It's that time of the day, yes, the end of the working day, time to sit down, talking pints, talk about the world and what's going on. And I'm joined tonight by John Bolton. John, welcome to the programme. Welcome to Talking Pints. Very good to see you. Now, you've had decades of experience in global
Don't remind me.
Well, I mean, you've been there since Reagan's time doing things. And, you know, you had your fun as American ambassador to the UN. That was a bit of a shock for them. And then, of course, the big national security job with Trump and much in between. And I credit people like you, and Trump too, actually, with waking us up to what China as a country was becoming. A very different country to what it was 10, 15 years ago under this President Xi. And you know, you guys have warned us. I mean, you've said in the past that it poses the biggest threat to us going forward. And I think people have listened. What do you make of the events of the weekend, of people out protesting against the lockdown to a virus that arguably was their fault in the first place?
Right. Well, I think everybody is amazed to watch these pictures, but it's also important to watch what the security forces are doing. They are showing minimum restraint. Yeah. And the real dilemma for Xi Jinping and the other leaders is, do they crack down harder now to try and stop it from spreading, or are they worried about pictures of another Tiananmen Square? I think that, you know, over the last almost 3 years, we haven't learned that much about what's going on inside China because they have locked down for COVID purposes. I think the discontent among the people is substantial, and these demonstrations are really the first chance they've had to express it. So Xi Jinping's in no immediate danger, but let's be clear, people remember the idea of freedom, and they don't like giving it up anywhere in the world.
Well, we've seen what's happened to Hong Kong. I mean, quite extraordinary. You know, the deal that was done, completely broken by the Chinese Communist Party.
This is a very important point. You know, a lot of people on the left in Europe and the United States like to talk about solemn international agreements. Well, what China did in Hong Kong shows exactly what they think about international agreements. So when it comes to trade deals or arms control deals, environmental protection deals, they'll sign it, but they have no intention of following it.
Yeah, well, that's certainly true with all of the global warming, climate change stuff as they build 80 new coal-fired power stations every year. Now, talking about the delusions of the left, I've got a question I've got to ask you. I can't work this out. I can't fathom it. So, to me, Iran, theocratic regime, been there over 40 years, barbaric, brutal, someone that a regime that spreads terror. I mean, they to me really are the bad guys in the piece. And yet, Biden's Democrats, everybody in Brussels, my ex-friends in the European Union, but even the British Conservative Party, when Boris Johnson was Foreign Secretary, they all think we have to come to some sort of great deal with Iran and somehow we're going to make them better and democratize them. What is it I'm missing, John, about all of this?
Well, I'm afraid you're not missing. It's another theology about this nuclear deal with Iran. In the U.S., the Democrats view the Iran deal as Obama's second term most important legacy, equal to Obamacare in the first term. So when Trump withdrew from the deal, quite correctly in my view, because it's a bad deal, the Biden administration came in determined to put it back in place, and they have made concession after concession to Tehran in an effort to do that. Now, I think, ironically, France, Germany, and Britain are more skeptical of the deal today than the Biden administration is. But what everybody should be looking at, as you're referring to, are the demonstrations in Iran all across the country, directly aimed at the legitimacy of the regime. This is not a dispute that the women have brought up about a dress code. They are saying we can make our own decisions. We're not going to listen to the Ayatollahs. And while, again, I don't think the regime in Tehran is going to fall tomorrow, we've reached a new level of dissent in Iran, and the regime is more threatened than at any point since they came to power in 1979.
Yeah, I'll drink to that.
That's for sure.
I have to say. And of course, they're being driven closer in many ways to Putin's Russia. You know, there's quite a strong alliance has really formed between these countries. When you look back at the last since the Berlin Wall came down, there was just a sort of never-ending push and drive to expand NATO. Did we get all of that wrong?
Well, I don't think so, because we weren't really pushing it. What happened, and I was in the first Bush administration at that time, working for Jim Baker, what we found was when the Warsaw Pact dissolved, and then it began to look like, and ultimately did see, the Soviet Union dissolve, we had the countries of Central and Eastern Europe banging on NATO's door, led by Hungary, saying, for God's sakes, let us in, because we've been invaded by the Nazis in one part of the 20th century. We've been occupied by the Soviets in another part of the 20th century. We just as soon remain independent. And NATO responded to that demand. Now, where NATO and the West as a whole, I think, did fail, was not concluding what the appropriate point to end the expansion was.
That's my point.
And we left a gray zone. We left a gray zone in Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, that Putin is now exploiting. And we're paying the consequences. But you know, we've seen just this past year, Finland and Sweden abandoning 75 years of neutrality to join NATO because they see it as protection.
Whatever we did on geopolitics, we are where we are. Is the future of Ukraine, this war, it's just stalemate, John, isn't it?
Well, I think what Putin is doing now, I think his strategy for the next 6 months is to freeze the military conflict where Russia has performed very badly, and to try and up the pressure on the political conflict, putting economic pressure on Ukraine itself by disabling its electricity generating infrastructure, and by, if I may say so, preying on the weaknesses of the European Union and the isolationist tendency in the United States to see if the resolve of the West will break. I don't think Ukraine's resolve will break. Question is whether ours breaks first. That's what Putin is hoping for.
We're going to see. We're going to take a break. In a moment, I'm going to ask John Bolton about American politics. Is it becoming a gerontocracy? Begins to look that way to me. Back with you in a couple of minutes.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
I'm back with John Bolton. John, looking across the pond, so we got the Democrats. We got Biden, he's 80. We've got Nancy Pelosi's just stood down as Speaker, she's 82. Hillary Clinton is 75, 76, and these are the senior Democrats that we see. Then we see the Republicans. We got Donald Trump, who's 76. We got Mitch McConnell, the senior senator, he's 80. What's going on? I mean, it looks like a gerontocracy. Now, experience, of course, a mixture of all of those things is exactly what you want. But what's happened in these parties?
Well, it's, I think, a combination of things, but basically it's the baby boom generation, and those a few years even older than the baby boom generation are not willing to let go. The Democrats actually began the transition with Barack Obama, and people at that point thought that there would never be another baby boom president. Then along came Trump and then Biden. So I think it may come more quickly than people think. In the Democratic side in the House of Representatives, not only has Pelosi gone, but the other top two Democrats, both also over 80, have stepped down, and they're going to have an uncontested election for their leadership. Kevin McCarthy, I think, will be Speaker of the House, although that's open to question. So it's beginning to change, but it's taken a long time. There's no doubt about it.
And does this all make Ron DeSantis look rather attractive? I mean, 44 years old, a wife, 3 young kids. I mean, he would be, for your party, he would, and I know you and Donald Trump are not exactly besties anymore, but is that a big advantage for DeSantis?
I think it is a big advantage. Look, he wants to be in a position, and so do the other people competing for the Republican nomination, to say, I can serve 2 full terms as president. if I'm elected in 2024. Trump can't say that because he's already had one.
Yeah.
And you want somebody who can do a full 8 years to fix the mess that we've got in Washington, and to be visibly with the energy and the enthusiasm and the long time horizon to do it. So my guess is that Donald Trump will not get the Republican nomination. It may be Ron DeSantis. He would be the front runner now, but we've got a very deep bench of people who are running. And while we're on the subject, I don't think Joe Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee in 2024. I think he will declare he's not running for a second term at some appropriate point in 2023. I don't think Kamala Harris will get their nomination either. I think they're going to have a wide open fight. So I suspect they will go to below the baby boom age level as well.
We'll see what happens. Trump is a great street fighter, of course, and has come back from being written off many.
You can't count him out. That's for sure.
Never. He's also got charisma. He's got whatever his faults may be. He does have charisma.
I would say this. I think he's past his prime now. And I don't mean in the Biden sense. I mean his act is the same act as it was before. And I do think Republicans are looking for a fresh face. That may be a controversial view in some circles, but I think that's what DeSantis will now test.
One thing about you, John Bolton, you're never, ever shy of saying what you think in any... No. It's very interesting. Now, I was in Arizona on the day of the midterms, and we still haven't got a result. It's going to be contested. I mean... How could anybody trust? Whether 2020 was a stolen election is a separate debate. But I mean, the whole thing's a farce, isn't it? You're getting states now where over 50% of the vote is people voting weeks, even months almost, before polling day itself. Is anyone going to sort this out?
Well, I think there's an answer here that's really based on fundamental democratic values, and that is we're a deeply divided country. Partisan divisions are very strong. We need things that bring us together as a country. And one thing I believe would do that is everybody, with rare exceptions, voting on the same day. That we vote on the same body of information. People are not voting a month before the election. They're voting on the same body of information. Maybe they have to stand in lines. People say that's inconvenient. Well, jury duty is inconvenient, but that's another act of common citizenship. Now, there can be exceptions, people in the military, people away on business, but by and large, the standard should be you get out and vote on election day.
Well, the French do this, and the French have a very, very simple, straightforward system with voter ID, all of these things, and nobody ever doubts or contests. And India, with over 1 billion people, within 4 hours, you have a result and you know what it is.
Yeah, and I think we can do that. Look, I spent 33 days in Florida in the year 2000 when Gore contested...
Remind me, dimpled chads, hanging chads.
You got it. 33 days. Florida has... over the years, made changes. They had their results this November in a few hours. If they can do it, so can the rest of them.
No, absolutely. Now, I've talked a little bit about, being a Brit looking across the pond, and I visit regularly, as you know. Tell me, what's it like looking at us this year, 2022? 4 chancellors of the Exchequer, 2 sovereigns, unfortunately, 3 prime ministers, a Conservative Party in disarray. How does it look from the other side?
Well, I was going to ask you to tell me what's going on. I mean, it's a condition of the British parliamentary system. That's the way these things work. But I think, just speaking as a conservative across the ocean here, the Conservatives have to get their act together and rally behind what distinguishes them for British voters, and that's adherence to principle. And I think the most important principle they've stood for since the time of the referendum was getting out of the European Union and ending the fixation with Europe and focusing on the rest of the world. Even today, the Remainers in the Conservative Party, let alone the rest of the establishment, are doing what I would consider a kind of Trumpian thing. They will not accept the results of the 2016 referendum. That's cost Britain 6 years of opportunities to make economic advancements around the world. It's not too late. A vigorous approach to this, I think, will pay enormous dividends for Britain. But your future is not with the bureaucratic sinking ship of the European Union. I've said for a long time, the European Union is less than the sum of its parts. The United States is harmed by Europe's inadequacies. That's why I welcomed Britain coming out of the European Union. You're a global power again, and that's Britain's proper place.
Yeah, well, I spent a lifetime fighting for this, and in the end, I persuaded the Conservative Party to get to the right position. They didn't want to, but they did get to the right position, and they haven't capitalised on it. We have a border problem. We haven't had supply-side reform. It's been very, very disappointing. As we look ahead to 2023, and clearly our economies are not in great shape, but you know, in history we go through booms and busts, and that's what happens. If we look to the potential problems of 2023, final thought, perhaps, John, from you on this, and rather a somber, reflective one, but Putin's taken great losses, and so have the Ukrainians too, but Putin has taken great losses. Do you worry that at some point next year he could consider using a limited nuclear device, or do you believe that actually the Russian generals would stop him from doing so?
Well, I don't think the Russian generals would stop him. I think until this point he has been bluffing. He hopes to play the nuclear card, again, to fragment the West, to convince people that we're being too supportive of Ukraine. I think the greatest risk, and you have to take nuclear weapons seriously 100% of the time, but the greatest risk is if his regime itself were threatened, if Russian forces in Ukraine collapsed entirely and retreated back toward the Russian border, or his own internal situation became so perilous that he thought he could save himself by using nuclear weapons. He's not at that point yet, but that is the point I would worry. I will say this, China is going to be the bigger nuclear threat very shortly. People have ignored their nuclear buildup. We talked about Iran, North Korea is even closer to getting nuclear weapons. Nobody should believe that we're past the threat of proliferation and what it can do to all of us.
John Bolton, we'll say our prayers this Christmas. Thank you for joining me.
Glad to be with you.
Talking Pints. Okay, it's Farage the Farage. No, it's Farage the Bolton, really, because you've sent in some questions for John. One viewer asks, who is the biggest threat to the Western world? He's answered that already, I think, that it's actually going to be China is the one we should worry about. David asks, how essential is NATO in keeping us safe?
NATO is the most successful politico-military alliance in history. What I think we need to do is consider how to make NATO more global, as Jose Maria Aznar, the former Prime Minister of Spain, suggested 15 years ago. I think that's something we should look at.
Interesting. Another asks, we're going to keep him on his toes, aren't we? We really are. Another asks, good question, does the special relationship still exist between the UK and the US? And I think this is in light of the fact that Mr. Biden doesn't seem to like us very much.
Well, you know, he has his faults, many of which are in the foreign policy area. But I think the special relationship is not about governments. I think it's about people with a common heritage and, most importantly of all, common ideals. And that's what, after a few early disagreements, has led to this partnership that's lasted for over a century and, to me, shows every prospect of continuing.
And finally, Sue asks, is it time to invest in our armed forces rather than more cuts? Well, Sue, it's really interesting. If you look at government spending in this country over the last 40 years, every department has ballooned apart from one, and that, of course, has been defence, which has been cut quite significantly. Now, we've always prided ourselves, apart from a vast Royal Navy, but we've always prided ourselves on a relatively small army through most of the centuries outside of world wars. But we have to be big enough and good enough for these guys to respect us, because all the while I feel that the UK and America are close together, the world would be a safer place. Are we
100%.
Do you still respect our military?
Yeah, I think you need to spend more on defense, but so do we. And I think we both need to cut our deficits. So the way to do that is to cut back on wasteful domestic spending, of which we certainly have a lot, and increase military spending.
We've got more than you've got, I promise you. John, been a great pleasure to have you on the programme. That's enough from me. I'm going to hand you over to the weather and then Mark Stein.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A big change in our weather is now taking place compared with the often wet and windy but mild weather we've seen during recent weeks and months. Still some showers about, but they'll fade away. And then most places are turning drier over the next few days as high pressure increasingly dominates our forecast. Now, This little weather front, clearing the east first thing this evening, will bring some further showers across parts of East Anglia and the southeast. A lot of cloud here, and that low cloud will keep temperatures from falling too far overnight, but otherwise clear spells elsewhere across the UK will lead to a widespread frost, -3 or -4 Celsius in places, and some dense fog patches first thing for the likes of the central belt into northwest England, parts of Wales and the southwest. Some of these fog patches could last until the afternoon, so where we get that, temperatures will be held back. And we'll see some low cloud lingering through the Midlands, East Anglia and the south of England. But away from these areas, especially for parts of Scotland, Northern England, parts of West Wales and Cornwall, bright blue skies and temperatures up to 6 to 12 Celsius. Dry for the vast majority as well, just 1 or 2 showers, perhaps peppering the coast of Kent and East Anglia, and they'll continue on Tuesday night. But widely across the rest of the UK, it's another night of clear skies for some, low cloud for others, mist, fog and frost forming, and a chilly start once again in the west, particularly on Wednesday. But one exception by this stage, Northern Ireland. Here, thicker cloud and some outbreaks of rain will move in from the Atlantic. However, unlike recent days and weeks, that rain won't make much progress across the rest of the UK because the jet stream's slowing down. That's the thing that brings us Atlantic weather, and higher pressure over Scandinavia is starting to dominate. So the second half of the week, although often cloudy, although it will be colder with some frost and fog, it will also be drier.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by 2 of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narendra.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to